people, so you are the right people to be here. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to be talking about thermal energy networks, tools, and resources. And I hopefully everyone in this room knows that thermal energy networks and geothermal networks are the most efficient way to heat and cool buildings available today. And so the question becomes, why aren't they everywhere? And so there's a few of us from different organizations that are working to try to communicate about TENS, and we have tools and resources that we are hoping that each one of you will be able to use in your communities to be able to build this as a national movement. As I'll start with introductions. I'm Ania Camargo, the Associate Director of Thermal Networks at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, which is a national nonprofit that works with all stakeholders to decarbonize buildings. And what I will be sharing is sort of nationally what kind of tools there are and what tools there are at my organization. I'll then pass it on to Jared, who will focus more on like the New York and the utilities, which you heard from the folks who are actually implementing this, but what are the tools available? And then Debbie New from Vermont Community Thermal Networks will be talking about municipalities and what communities can do to install thermal networks. And finally, we will finish with Angie Alberto squad from HEET, who will talk about the communities that HEET is working with in Massachusetts. So this is going to be a little bit of a weird session where we're going to be throwing a lot of tools at you. It might feel a little overwhelming, so please fasten your seatbelt. And really what we want you to leave is not to know every tool that's up here, but just know that it exists and know where you can find it. And so that's the goal. You guys ready? Okay. So here's us. So I'm going to start with how we are thinking about thermal energy networks. I want to say that this is a work in progress because everybody's defining thermal energy networks differently and what's included and not included. Within BDC, we are thinking it's connected buildings that share non-combusting thermal energy, but we're pretty broad in the fact that we know there's some amazing systems that have a central plant, are district systems with geothermal. There's also the distributed systems with a heat pump in every building. Some have boreholes, some do not. And so we're thinking pretty expansively about what is included. And we track legislation. So everything I share is on our website. If you want to know who has passed legislation, so far 8 states have passed legislation that either allows or mandates utilities to implement thermal energy network pilots. You can see them listed here. And I just want to get a sense of who's in the room. If you don't mind raising your hand if you are in one of the states that has passed legislation. Well, okay. That's like 2/3 of the room. Congratulations. You're probably involved in it. All right. So incredibly, that started in 2021. In 2025, 7 new states have filed legislation that we're hoping will pass in those states. And so I'm wondering who in this room is from one of the 7 states that has filed legislation. And those are the ones in blue. Okay. Great. A little bit fewer. Now, is there anyone here who's from a state that is gray and has not yet? All right. Wonderful. 1 person. We are counting on you. Which state? Perfect. Hopefully you will be next to get you up here for 2026. So it's a lot of you are from these states, but I think the really important thing that I want to point out is that these are utility thermal that we have to pass legislation because usually utilities, because they're regulated, are only allowed to sell gas or electricity. And so we have to pass legislation to do that. But there are many, many other ownership models. So at BDC, we interviewed over 30 different owners and grouped them into these 5 different buckets. These buckets can cross. They're not perfect buckets. But if you go onto our website, you can see sort of the municipality ones, co-ops, investor-owned, campus, and private developers, and then see what are we seeing that's cutting across all of them, because all of these ownership models are going to be pretty important going forward. And we are starting to post up case studies. So each one of these folks that we interviewed with, we worked with the different sites to write up case studies, and these are really important because they follow the trajectory of how these communities or utilities are making things happen. These three that just went up are all municipally owned, which is pretty interesting. So it doesn't have to just be utilities. All right. So how does everybody else get this to happen? How can we make this go across the country? Very importantly, thermal energy networks are so much more than connecting buildings, and it really starts with connecting people. And so I'm just going to go through each one of these, but starting with the stakeholders. New York is an extraordinary example of different folks coming together from labor leaders, environmental justice advocates, environmental advocates, even the utilities coming together to create the UTENJA bill. And that is what allowed UTENJA, the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act, to actually pass, and now that it's being implemented. And these same folks are teaming up on the regulation to make sure that the regulation is wonderful. And they will also be super instrumental as the implementation plays out. This has happened in almost every state that there's legislation that's been passed. And so at the BDC, at my organization, with HEET, we've teamed up to say, okay, you folks who lead on-the-ground coalitions, let's get together and learn from each other. And so this allows the best practices to be shared across and to share not only within advocates, but within other coalitions. So you all probably know there's a utility NY-GEO collaborative. It has 28 utilities representing almost half of the U.S. gas customers and about 75% of the Canadian gas customers. And so they're sharing best practices within utilities. And then we just recently launched with GeoExchange, Thermal Energy Network Industry Group, thinking, okay, now let's bring together all of the folks who are working in industry to how do we work on this as an industry to advocate for thermal networks. And HEET runs quarterly regulatory forums, so bringing the regulators together so that they can start communicating. And you can see where I'm going with this. The more we can connect people, the next piece is how do we connect these coalitions together. The more we can do this at scale, faster, and learning from each other, so doing it better and better. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece is, people don't know what geothermal is, and thermal networks, they really don't know. And so we need to communicate to everybody, regulators, legislators, advocates, everybody needs to learn about these systems. And so all of our organizations have materials that you all can use. I've put QR codes, but we have like a 2-pager, frequently asked questions. Here's my favorite tool that I hope you will check out, which is a neighborhood scale decarb map. And it has all of the thermal networks, but also electrification that went from gas to electrification networks. And you see all of the little dots, but on the left, you can look at them by the type of network, the status, like it's under construction, it's operational, and then who owns it. And you can also, you see that says add or edit there on the right. You can submit any new projects that we don't have on there. So we're trying to make this open access so that everybody can contribute to it. So it's crowdsourced. And then if you click on any of those little buttons, you will see all of the details about the sites. And if you want to filter by country, by ownership, by status, or anything else, you can get the list. Right now it's US and Canada, but we are adding Europe over the next few months. And we update this on a monthly basis. Research materials. We're also putting out a lot of research materials, reaching out to people across the country, many of you in this room probably, so thank you. The one I'd like to highlight here is the one on the right, which is a COP paper, which is basically talking about the importance of efficiency. And I just pulled out my favorite little graph there because it shows on that top triangle, it's the comparison of the price of gas and the price of electricity. And if you have a COP of 2.5 in most of the country, you can see only about half of those customers would be saving money. But if you have a COP of 6, which was what was shown in Colorado Mesa University, almost everybody would save money. So having that message about the importance of efficiency out there is critical. And these kinds of documents help do that. We also are big on blogs and news, and anything we do gets posted to get the word about thermal energy networks out there. And so we have a newsletter if you want to follow that. And I just want to move on to legislation, which, as we talked about, the reason why legislation is so important is because it allows utilities to get involved, but also because utilities are incredible potential of transitioning the whole gas system. They have the workforce, they have the connections with the customers. They have so many reasons why they have a good potential business model that could allow us to do this fast and at scale. So we just recently put out a legislative guidebook, which has 3 interconnected parts, a landing page, a guidebook, and the statutory language and the way that works. The landing page is broken up the bills into parts. So, for example, one of the parts is how do we finance the pilots? And you can click on that, and it'll take you to comparisons of how each state is financing their pilots. What do they include in the rates, what they don't, and it gives guidance. We are super aware that every state is different, and we'll have to do it. So we don't tell people what to do, but it includes what are the pros and cons of the different legislation and the different language that is used. And then if you click on each one of these sections, it'll take you to a listing of the actual statutory language. And so you can find out what each state actually wrote in their bills and where to find it in their bills and within what context. So that's and also just on legislation, we also just always keep an up-to-date list on there of who's filed legislation, who's passed legislation, even beside this tool. All right. And then the last piece is this deployment and readiness. And this is going to be something that I think some of the folks on our panel can talk about more. This is the part, for us to be able to really scale this, we have to get to that deployment and readiness, and we're not quite there on the financing, the workforce readiness, supply chain, all of that. So I think hopefully you guys will comment a little bit on that. And that is everything from me. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Jared.
Right. Okay. All right. Try to keep up with this. So I'm Jared Rodriguez from Emergent Urban Concepts. I do a lot of work with municipalities, utilities, organizations like BDC, HEET, Vermont Community Thermal Networks, et cetera. So TENS, or thermal energy networks, they provide for neighborhood scale decarbonization. I'll talk about what that is. Why do we need it? Well, we need to accelerate decarbonization at scale. We can't do house by house. We have to reduce the cost of new construction, like affordable housing, and we can do that through shared infrastructure. We can enable large-scale heat recovery and resource-efficient decarbonization, which is something I'll speak about. And this is all in order to provide systems that provide, net positive, net present value over the course of their life. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. We could think about decarbonization as economic development. So what's neighborhood scale decarbonization? I'm here to get you thinking in a different framework, right? You probably came into this room thinking that TENS are a specific thing, or they're produced by a specific type of company and they are a specific thing. None of that's true. Okay, neighborhood scale decarbonization is basically an approach to transition buildings off of fossil fuels and do that in a way that creates a creative benefit across businesses and residents in that neighborhood. So how can we have win-wins within a specific geographic targeted area to create the maximum amount of benefits? This looks a lot more like economic development than traditional climate action, right? We have to be blending those two efforts together. So what is resource-efficient decarbonization? It's a shorthand mental model or approach to achieving decarbonization in buildings. Buildings don't decarbonize all at once, or if they do, that's very rare. I mean, we saw this Framingham project in Massachusetts happen. Very rare that we can make an entire building go off fossil fuels, especially big buildings in urbanized areas like Saratoga, Main Street. Rare that we can do that all in one fell swoop. So what do we have to do? We have to take stepwise incremental approaches to achieving lower emissions and then eventually no emissions across the built environment. And we can do that with these 4 steps, or reduce, which we've been doing for years. We can reconfigure systems to lower temperature distribution, enable buildings to connect to thermal energy networks down the road as the network, approaches on Main Street, for example, recover as much heat as possible, driving down that emissions profile of the building and readying it for connection to a thermal energy network, and then ultimately replace all systems with electrified systems. And so here it is again, just in another image for you, and showing some specific approaches that could be implemented in each of those particular buckets. So reduce, recover, reconfigure, partially electrify, and then fully electrify. Thermal energy networks fit into that big picture across the neighborhood scale. So some potential policy mechanisms to do this. So we have to do permanent peak load reductions. Beating the peak is one of the important things we'll do. I'll talk more about that. We should be doing mandatory heat recovery. I just saw an announcement from Empire State Development that Chobani is building one of the largest yogurt plants in the United States in New York State. Did they do heat recovery in their project? No. Why? Why are they getting funding from New York State to build a plant and not do heat recovery? Non-pipes alternatives, non-wires alternatives. How can we reduce the total amount of infrastructure that we need to build to create economic development, but also a fully decarbonized economy? Affirm the municipal role, right? Municipalities have a really strong role to play in economic development and neighborhood scale decarb. And then authorize regulated investor-owned utilities to own and develop TENS. And Ania talked a lot about that. And then create and enforce a thermal energy marketplace. I'll talk a little bit about that. So UTENJA, what is it? It's not Jumanji. It's the Utility Thermal Energy Networks Act of 2022. It is the transformative legislative movement that happened in New York State that launched this regulatory regime. So Emergent trends from New York's UTENJA, right? So we're creating a regulatory framework that supports a diversity of players. As I said, there's multiple players that can deliver thermal energy networks and decarbonization across the neighborhood scale. Regulated IOUs aren't the only players. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Municipalities have a strong role. Campuses and customer-owned systems can integrate and maybe should be lightly regulated or even exempted. The more competition, the better. And system complexity makes this difficult, but we can learn from other models like the electric grid, right? So the electric grid is a multi-party system. There's transmission, distribution, there's power generators, there's local distribution, there's municipalities, there's individual private networks, and all types of systems that come together on a common carrier type of platform. So what is that? What's open access common carrier? It's a regulatory framework that ensures that TENS can function sort of like the electric grid in an open market that allows a diversity of players to participate and sends very clear market signals so that diversity of players knows how to act, right? And doing that requires very clear regulatory requirements, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So key takeaways, right? So here are some best practices around regulatory issues. So many parties, right, are needed for success. We're doing this huge project of thermal energy networks and neighborhood scale decarbonization. We need to have as many people involved in this process as possible. Anyone that says that it's one job of one type of company or I alone can fix it is wrong. And they need to be put in their corner and told to stay quiet. We can establish best practice standards that create common interconnection requirements. This is a lot like electric, remember that. Operational parameters, standardized retrofits. We can understand that these regulated investor-owned utilities, while they are powerful and can deliver big things for us, they're not the only player. And if they're monopolistic and they have monopolistic tendencies, they kind of have to be put in their corner. And the rules have to be told to them so that they don't interfere in ways that are unproductive. So we need a democratic process, and we need to understand that economic development is neighborhood scale decarbonization and vice versa. So this is huge. I mean, the biggest idea that we could talk about is beating electric peak, right? And decarbonizing our state while also reducing the peak load on the grid, because that grid is so expensive to build out. Ania showed a number of projects that are being developed currently under the pilot project regime with utilities. The Mount Vernon project is fantastic. It's mostly geothermal. It's going to retire an existing gas main in a disadvantaged community. The Chelsea project, it originated as an idea kind of focused on the High Line in Chelsea, New York, right? That the High Line could be an organizing principle to move heat between data centers and buildings and hotels, et cetera. And then it became the Chelsea project with Con Edison as they adopted that effort. No boreholes here, just heat recovery from a data center. Rockefeller Center, leveraging existing equipment and existing infrastructure to interconnect buildings to enable heat sharing across different usage profiles. Havistraw, 2 different loops on either side of a main street, very much like Saratoga Springs, that can come together in the future, but serve very different load shapes. So one is a municipal cluster, Village Hall, community center. The other one is new construction, affordable housing, reducing the costs of the affordable housing production. There it is. There's that affordable housing in the front. Ithaca, really cool project that will hopefully evolve over time. But Ithaca is one of the leaders in New York State thinking about neighborhood scale decarbonization. They said, we can do this as a city. We can partner with all the key parties and we can move the entire city, away from fossil fuel over time. Troy Local Development Corporation, established to help do economic development, understood that neighborhood scale decarb was an economic development mechanism, and is owning and supporting borehole fields, right, bore fields, and selling heat into a thermal energy network owned by the regulated investor-owned utility. So, multiple parties functioning. Just want to leave you remembering this. This is the most important thing that we can do today, right, as we prepare for economic-wide decarbonization. Come to a talk that I'm doing tomorrow about this. And then the other thing that we can do is tell the Department of Public Service how to regulate this. And you can be involved in this. So take a picture of these QR codes and get into the filing of these projects, into these regulatory proceedings around grid of the future. How will the future grid operate? How will thermal energy networks operate? How will they be regulated? You can tell the Department of Public Service to do these things if you agree with them or not. So we have a lot of power to shape what this looks like, and it's very important that people understand that there's a lot of power in this room to shape future outcomes. Things don't just happen to us, we make them happen. And so we'll do questions after. Thank you.
Great. So my role here today is to share what's happening in Vermont and offering some ideas for you in case that might work where you are. And we're finding that the more people learn about TENS, the more people want to make them happen in their towns. We also know that many towns are strapped. Yours probably is too, in terms of capacity, time, money, and a lot of urgent priorities. So we're working to make TENS more approachable by helping people understand that TENS are place-based, which means mainly that it can benefit a particular community in ways that the people there want it to work for them, that it can align with local goals and needs they already have, and offer multiple pathways to local ownership. So here are the kinds of projects that we are exploring. There are many places to start. You can see that these are small. They're just a couple of buildings or facilities, and then we can add more over time. So for example, the third one here, there's a town hall that needs to upgrade its energy system, and it can use heat from the ice arena nearby. And later, new housing that we need to construct there can be connected to the network and add in a church that provides important meals for seniors and other community support. So we can prioritize local needs and make use of local assets to serve those needs. So in response to this, we've developed a toolkit that's called How to Develop a Thermal Energy Network. And it's meant as a practical guide, hopefully in plain language, to talk people through the various stages of developing a thermal energy network. And I want to make sure to thank BDC, Ania, Jared was a contributor, and my colleague who's here from Vermont, Sam Lash. I hope you get to meet her. And Morgan Hood from Vermont Gas System all contributed to this. So this is organized in 4 chapters, essentially. And Start Here is about how to start thinking about heat and networking heat. Then Identifying Opportunities is a lot about site selection. Understanding Ownership is not just about exploring a few different models for ownership, but also the related financing opportunities. And Develop Your Project, excuse me, is something that I like to call what to expect when you're expecting a thermal energy network. So let's look at each of those in turn. As I said, Start Here is where we begin with communities, and it's about starting to see heat differently than people are used to doing, and also how people can share heat between buildings. Our main resource in this section is what we're calling an opportunities chart. It's just this one page, and it lists local conditions that could be opportunities for a TEN. And we want to make sure people understand that any one of these could be a great opportunity, but the more you can add to it, the larger your TEN might become, especially over time. So we're encouraging people to ask a bunch of questions, but some of them are you doing water and wastewater work locally that could include a TEN? Where are spaces that could host a bore field, like a town green, a rec field, or a parking lot? And what are your thermal energy resources? In other words, is there a lot of refrigeration or large cooling systems where heat is being wasted but could otherwise be repurposed? And is there manufacturing that could be a big part of this in terms of waste heat and wastewater heat recovery? In Vermont, that looks a lot like beer, cheese, and some ice cream as well, but it could really be lots of different kinds of manufacturing. We want to make sure people understand that TENs are more cost-effective when they're paired with other projects, like trenching for water or wastewater systems can include a thermal pipe and therefore be more eligible for IRA incentives. We also want people to know that good places to start could look like local buildings, say schools, that have heating systems that are old and need to be replaced, or a local grocery store that's stuck on oil and propane, and there are a lot of those where we live. There are not much gas company customers in Vermont. And from there we go to identifying opportunities, which, as I said, is about site selection, but it's not just about site selection. It's also how to be TEN ready. So that means whether or not you're ready to launch a TEN, you can lay the groundwork for it. You can inventory your thermal energy resources, you can inventory buildings that could connect, and you can create a map to be able to share that opportunity, that cluster of buildings with other people. You can also plan ahead, not only by identifying possible projects, but adding TENs to local and regional plans, which means that it's already prioritized as a local goal. And if you can't make a TEN happen now, you can upgrade systems with a TEN in mind. So retrofitting buildings or adding buildings that are new to have TEN compatible equipment that is hydronic and that kind of thing. In understanding ownership, we talk about many ways to operate a thermal energy network, but we focus on 3: a cooperative model, a municipal model, and a third-party company. For each one, we identify advantages and challenges, and we raise questions that people can consider for themselves. From there, we look at the financing opportunities that can help a community afford a TEN over time, depending on what the model is that they choose. There are 2 really important messages here. That the idea of municipalities or communities doing a TEN doesn't mean they have to do everything themselves or do everything at once. And that a TEN does not have to raise taxes. That's something people assume. But a TEN generates revenue over time, which pays back the upfront costs, as many people here probably understand. You can also be a municipality that allows like selling heat from your wastewater treatment plant to generate revenue for you. And I just learned about the library at West Union, Iowa, which was listed as a municipal thermal energy network. Their basement room was unusable because it was really uncomfortable. But once they connected to the network, it was dehumidified and not only usable by the library, but also for the library to rent to others and collect fees for being able to use that facility. So the town is earning money from their thermal energy network in more than one way. From there, it's about developing your project. which is an introduction to the phases of pretty much any shared infrastructure project that a project team or a third party would coordinate over and oversee. Not necessarily local people doing the work themselves, but we include actions related to stakeholder engagement and best practices that local leaders can ensure are part of every project, no matter what the phase is. So we're able to do this work in this way in Vermont because we passed legislation last year to enable thermal energy networks. Essentially, our Thermal Energy Network Act is a green light for local heating and cooling. It authorizes all municipalities to build TENs and establish thermal energy utilities without Public Utility Commission oversight, just as municipalities already offer water and sewer systems. And of course, campuses, condominiums, cooperatives, and landlords can already provide TENs, so the law doesn't change that. Any single owner or locally governed entity is allowed to go right ahead with what they're doing because it's controlled by the people who participate in it. So every state is different. Many municipalities can already do this in a lot of states. I need a drink. Hang on. So our legislation allows and our toolkit informs our work with communities that really focus on what's already happening, where could this work, and who's needed. Our goal is not about the technology or the feasibility first, but more about what can work here and identifying an approach that's acceptable locally in order to help it be successful. We're sharing with municipalities what we think they need to know, which is that a TEN can be a civic asset. It can be in alignment with local goals and needs, and it doesn't have to tax a town's capacity. It doesn't mean additional work necessarily, but can be about using the customer bills to hire someone to work on the TEN and then have extra time because the TEN is not going to take their full time, have extra time to do other things that the town needs. There's a town manager in one Vermont town who already is appreciating that. So the last thing I want to share is that people in Vermont are realizing that the technology is straightforward and well established. Small groups of people can actually do this, and it's achievable. And another person has said, I like that we're not just replicating something prepackaged. We're asking questions, we're learning, and we're implementing it ourselves. So people are more receptive, and our town has agency. So here's a QR code for the toolkit. You can check it out, see if it works for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Alberto Escobar. I work at HEET, and I've been asked to talk to you about our Kickstart Massachusetts program. But at first, I wanted to thank Awen for proctoring the room and Christine and John for having HEET present, not just in this panel, but the panel right after, which I highly recommend you guys attend. So Kickstart Massachusetts is a program that's designed and implemented through HEET, but funded by the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center as a part of a larger research project. If you want to know more about that research project, again, slugging the next panel. So really it was designed to unlock local data at the municipal level to start getting data points back to the state about the readiness of communities in the Commonwealth. It's a grant program, and there's 2 tiers. The first tier is just to support education of thermal energy networks or geothermal networks, the technology itself, the benefits that it brings, and really start to assess the motivations and any kind of feedback from the community to really kind of prime them with understanding of what this means for them, short-term and long-term impacts. The second tier, which we granted 8 communities with $50,000 to conduct initial feasibility studies to take a look at the geological conditions and what have you, so that we can start to uncover what the roadmap for Massachusetts really looks like and start to inform the state that way. So here's a snapshot of the awardees of the Kickstart Mass program. The more opaque ones are the feasibility studies, And so we wanted to leave it wide open and not kind of dictate who could apply so that we could have a diversity of applicants. And so you can see here, we had sustainability organizations that applied, municipalities themselves, faith leaders, and even development corporations for a number of different applications, including affordable housing, an industrial campus that needs to be remediated, which is interesting, life science buildings, which are very energy dense, and social programs buildings, again, to kind of what Debbie was speaking to, and rural municipal campuses, actually. And so the goals of the program was really to create a pipeline of projects in Massachusetts. But what the real intent was to start to build visibility of the technology in nodes across Massachusetts, which is why it was important for us to get, a southern community that was located geographically diverse as well in southern parts of Massachusetts and western parts of Massachusetts, to start to build visibility about the technology, but also the local data, the local conditions there. Might they be social, political, or technical, and start to share that information back in an open source way. Everything that HEET does is completely open source and published on our website or on the wiki, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. And we're hoping that this program is able to, start to pave the path for equitable implementation. So start to understand the sensitivities at the local level, and also hopefully lay the groundwork for some smart utility policy and regulation. And so I'm going to share a barrier that came out of conversations through the program, which went all of 2024 and part of Q1 of 2025, which is that there was a perceived risk of regulatory hurdles at the local level, at the municipal level. So there was hesitance from some local partners on moving forward with the project because they weren't quite sure, they weren't geothermal experts, of what those regulatory hurdles might be. And so we actually, through those conversations, we decided to put that into the program. And so we asked the Tier 2 grantees to conduct a regulatory review. And it was actually optional for the Tier 1 grantees to do that as well, and some of them did. And so that revealed the regional environmental conditions, the site environmental conditions, and the permitting process for a particular site. This is an example from one of the feasibility study reports. Alone, it gives us insight just to that one project, but as a portfolio, it starts to uncover what maybe only geothermal experts have the knowledge of, what the roadmap for pulling permits and what have you. Geothermal is 2% of the HVAC industry, is what I heard in the last panel I attended. So, it's not uncommon for these permits to be quite obscure to municipal staff. And so we're hoping that through this portfolio of feasibility studies that those will become more visible, essentially. So that's what I wanted to share with you, is that barrier and this program framed as a resource, right? The results of these feasibility studies in a portfolio style for you to be able to compare and contrast them, really understand what can you get with $50,000, what does that uncover, what's the regulatory pathway for this particular project, what themes can we capture across the portfolio, make that available to the public, to decision makers, and just residents in general. So that's the one resource I would say, is that portfolio of feasibility studies. We also have a wiki. A wiki is an open learning platform where you could just create an account and contribute to the learning platform. It's just gas2geo.wiki. So if you're interested, you're an expert, you're interested in learning about the components of the system, what impacts they have, what the externalities are, what the utility pathway is and why it matters, all of that is centralized into this wiki, and we're happy to have more people contribute to that. So that's the second resource I want to share here. And the third resource is on our HEET website is the Gas2Geo Resource Hub. which has a number of things. I will go through them in a second. One of the insights I wanted to share from the feasibility studies portfolio is that community trust is foundational for these projects to have momentum and ultimately be deemed successful. So clear, transparent communication about the short-term impacts and the long-term impacts to the locale, but also to the individual is really important. And for that communication to be tied to the design or the project that's ultimately implemented, for those to be consistent is critical, because then you risk breaking trust, right? If people are getting excited about being able to have the provision of cooling in a thermal energy network, and then the design firm comes in and installs a different type of system that doesn't provide cooling, that trust is now broken, and that impacts the system as a whole. So I would say that's a key insight, that to maintain a good connection between the implementer, the project lead, and whoever is doing the community engagement. It's best if those are combined, but if not, then having a good flow of communication is important. And Chair Van Nostrum talked about the success of the Eversource pilot. That was not by accident, right? They did a lot of community engagement right up front. They had their marketing team go out and talk to the residents and really talk to them about the offering, really hear what they had to say. They also had a tent that was up all summer long for people to go up and ask questions. They had a lot of bi-directional communication, not just reporting and telling people this offering is here, but really hearing about people's concerns, their motivations for participating in the loop, and having a number of on-site meetings, but also participating in community events to really build that trust again. And that resulted in 80% of the residential homes in the pilot area opting in to participate. So when we're talking about, Chairman Nostrum was talking about, okay, we need to get to 100%. Well, maybe in California, we need to get to 65% to decommission gas. Well, it starts here. It starts with community engagement. So I really want to drill that at home. So resources for community engagement are on this slide, which include what was in the Gas-to-Geo Resource Hub, the Gas-to-Geo Toolkit, with a number of different resources, including kind of template slide decks that you can use to kind of talk to the layman about impacts to them, impacts to society, etc., FAQs for residents and businesses, site selection tools. Some of the ones that were talked about today are linked in that toolkit, and an RFP template for any municipality that's ready to move forward. We also have this WANT geomap that's pictured here. So that's essentially a visualization of the demand from residents and just regular people. And so we're highly encouraging folks to use that resource so that we can help our decision makers visualize what the true demand really is for these types of systems. There's also a partner that we work with at MIT called the MIT Renewable Energy Clinic. It's a siting clinic that essentially does stakeholder analyses, and they can have different objectives. We have one that is redacted, that is in the toolkit, that talks through just the consideration of a community-owned thermal network. There can also be a stakeholder analysis that's done on what ownership model is best fit for this locale. Is it the IOU model? Is it a community-owned model? So a stakeholder analysis can be done through the Renewable Energy Clinic, and there's a one-pager on the toolkit so you can get connected with them. And there's a number of other resources within that toolkit, but I just wanted to give you a little flavor of that. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I wanted to ask you all, I want to start with a question is, what, from your perspective, is a tool that is missing?
A lot. Where are there electric constrained areas in the electric grid? We see in California, for example, maps that show constrained areas where solar interconnection is a problem. As they pursue neighborhood scale decarb with their neighborhood scale bill that passed with the help of BDC. They will begin to map out these electric constrained areas so that non-wires alternatives approaches, which network geothermal and thermal energy networks are, could be strategically implemented by, a variety of different actors, including the investor-owned utility. So I think that's actually one of the big ones that we need to see. And the regulator, for example, in New York, should be mandating clarity on where there are specific electric constrained areas, maybe even on a block by block basis.
Yes. So I would second that. Mapping, visualization is huge. At HEET, we love maps. But to be able to layer, electric grid constraints with the demand map, with, the geological formations, and something that doesn't exist is a map of low-grade waste heat sources, right? And so having something like that could help determine where is the best place to put a 10, at least at a high level.
Thank you.
And I'll say the obvious, which is more on cost. Everyone always wants to know how much will this cost. There are privately owned TENs and new campus TENs where there's some data available, but not enough. People also want to know, okay, well, that works in that state, but we're different here. So it's really important to have a range of information about costs that can help inform people so they can relate to the project costs that are shared in this resource that somehow, hopefully, will be created.
Well, one more just to add to this. So bring it back to the economic development issue, right? That this is shared infrastructure that supports economic development and growth. Understanding where intentional growth areas are in New York State, for example, is really important. The state has generally failed to properly identify where those intentional growth areas are, even as it says that it supports affordable housing development and intensification of existing urbanized areas. We generally leave that to individual municipalities to do, but it's a pretty disjointed map across the state of where growth is intended to occur. Knowing where that would be is a really important thing. Even just knowing where industrial development is going to occur. I said Chobani earlier, Micron is the big one near Syracuse, and they're not capturing any of their waste heat, which is really unfortunate. So where are we intending to put industrial development? Where are we intending to put data centers? And where is growth going to happen from a residential and commercial perspective, say in our downtown cores?
I actually want to add another one too that may be less technical, but I think multimedia coverage, just people knowing about geothermal and wanting it. A lot of people don't really care about our energy system. It's very much invisible. How do we get people to care through channels that we're already so consumed by? How can we create educational materials like videos, short form videos, and things like that? I think those are really impactful.
I totally agree with all of your assessments. I do want to open it up to the public so that other folks can either ask questions or ask about tools that you'd like to see.
Hey, thank you, Greg Camoulas, Con Ed. Hello, everybody. In Canada and Vancouver area and whatnot, we've seen cities or municipalities partnering in the zoning side early on, where it'd be requirements from these new developments to connect and kind of partner with utilities, perhaps to build systems in place to be there. Are there any efforts done by your groups here domestically that are looking for those same things that can bring in utilities as partners in the early kind of city planning side? Because I think that's really where would be a great benefit, to be able to to make that connection to what's going there, and not get lost in the must fully decarbonize everything story, and get into let's start actually building some networks where they make sense.
So I want to say that when we did the regulatory and the legislative review, I think that is where everybody's thinking this has to go, is that joint planning, gas, electric, water, and then thinking about with the communities. I know that, I don't know if you want to talk about HEET and what HEET is doing with this, but.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's very nascent, but the city of Cambridge, is dominated by life sciences buildings, labs buildings, and it's also a gas island. And so it's a great place to pilot a project like the tactical thermal transition tool is what HEET is calling it, where we're basically partnering with the Kendall Square Association, if I'm getting that correct, and the city of Cambridge and the utility there to start essentially doing a master plan for how to transition that gas island.
The problem with New York is that it's a home rule state and individual municipalities control their zoning. And every time the state of New York attempts to interfere with that activity, people get their pitchforks and torches out. Our governor attempted to do that with affordable housing and zoning fairly recently. And everyone, including the Senate Majority Leader, was like, get in your corner. Like, don't you dare. So the only way that New York State can influence zoning and planning is by saying what the best practice is, so just showing it, and then dangling carrots to get the municipality to engage in a process. So one of the best ways that New York State has done this is through what Empire State Development calls, and the Department of State calls, the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, and New York Forward. So you may have heard about this in your own community across New York. Governor Cuomo started this program, and basically communities can vie for $10 million in economic development funding for kind of like anything, but within a very constrained geographic location, typically focused on a main street. So more of a dense, walkable, mixed-use type of community. I went through this process with the Village of Haverstraw, New York. I was also their comprehensive plan chairman, and we years ago incorporated thermal energy networks and district heating discussion into their comprehensive plan. Similarly, in Nyack, New York, for example, Columbia University is doing a master's thesis capstone project as a group project, and they're looking at neighborhood scale decarbonization for the downtown core in Nyack. Nyack is also joining the DRI New York Forward program for funding from the state. And hopefully within that planning process, they'll begin to incorporate thermal energy network and waste heat discussion. So this is really town by town, unfortunately. And our state is doing nothing to encourage towns to think like this. So if we want the state to start doing this, knock on the door of Empire State Development in Albany and tell them, change your DRI program, change your New York Forward program, and get them to start doing planning for decarbonization in an appropriate way. And we can also get NYSERDA to do that as well. Sorry, nice.
Hi, Lisa. Oh, is this on? Can you hear me? Oh, Lisa Marshall, New Yorkers for Clean Power. I love the panel. I was working on a TENS project at the end of a gas line in a utility territory, and we were told, the utility told the contractor that they needed to get individual permission from every property owner for the right-of-way to put in. And I thought the whole point of utilities is they already have a right-of-way, but they said they don't have it for TENS. So I wonder if you've encountered this, or if anybody has any solutions, because I thought that was super dumb. Okay.
I'm going to say, are there any regulators here from New York? So I can't answer. I have not heard of that either. I mean, I know in Massachusetts, where I'm from, the towns have the right of way. You know, they can decide on the utility right of way and what's happening. So they can give permission. So I don't know. Is there anyone from New York here who can answer that question?
Yeah, I can answer it. When did that happen? What year was that?
Ongoing.
Okay, and you don't want to say which utility that is?
NYSEG.
Okay.
We can talk after.
We could talk after. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Brock Urity, Geothermal Drillers Association. How do we demystify the complexities on trying to get these projects started, or when we make statements like, it just wasn't feasible and it costs too much? How do we get past that?
That's what I'm trying to tackle with the Kickstart Massachusetts feasibility study portfolio. A lot of the reports that we received were highly technical and great, but how do you take a reader along in your understanding of why it wasn't feasible? That's something that we're really challenging consultants to provide within the reports so that it really is a resource and not just jargon.
I guess I would start by saying that we don't, like I said, we don't look first at the technology and the feasibility and the complexness of a thermal energy network. We start with what people want and what the resources are, especially resources that already have heat where we don't have to drill for them. Love drilling, right? But it's more expensive, and it is a deterrent in terms of just drilling. So we look for where we already have heat and where we can use it easily, send it in pipes underground. And it's the simplest thing. People understand ground source heat pumps when they're explained to them. People understand water in pipes. They understand the depth of a water or sewer pipe, and they understand that that's where the thermal pipe would be. And so people really are understanding this as something that's familiar. And they already operate systems like this. And we don't do the complexity up front. We let the engineers look at that, and we talk with the people who can benefit from the 10 about what they can get out of it and how possible it is. They seem to be understanding that because there are a lot more towns that want to do this.
Yeah. And I want to respond to your particular question about saying that it didn't work, and so then what happened? There was a lot of blowback when National Grid, but I work with people across the country when National Grid said that they were not going to do the Lowell project because it was too expensive. There was a lot of concern and a lot of like, you see, it's too expensive. I think that we have to remember that we are at the pilot, very beginning phase, and that we have to be able to mess up. Like, we have to mess up and learn from what we messed up and figure out like what didn't work. Because what would be really terrible is to put a ton of money behind a bad project that then would affect the rest of the industry. So I think being able to say we're learning and what did we learn from that and how do we change that and how do we fix it is going to be really important, and give a little grace to the fact that there's going to be problems because the utilities are learning everything on this. So anyway, our hope is that with the second project that National Grid is proposing in Massachusetts, that'll be a lot better because they are not having to deal with the retrofit side of the equation. So anyway, just putting a little out there that people should be allowed to not build things if they're not working out.
One note on that, right? And this is a misconception. It's sort of like a mental model failure. What is it? What is the project that you're talking about that failed? There isn't one project. It's not like this is an object, right? A thermal energy network isn't a thing that you can hold, and it's the same in every community. It's an approach. It's not a thing. So we can't say thermal energy networks are too expensive. What are you talking about? Like, what is that? What's too expensive? What made it not work? Also, let's not do this backwards and try to shoehorn things into neighborhoods. Let's let the neighborhood tell us what works, right? Because a thermal energy network could be as simple as the grocery store next to the mixed-use building and taking the heat from the grocery store and making domestic hot water. That's all that it is. They could be right next door. It could be within 8 feet. And that will probably pencil versus I need to do the entire main street and I have to think about it all at once and I need to hit 80% of all the buildings and I need to drill boreholes because I love drilling because I'm a driller, right? Sure, right? Sure. But that's not how these projects are going to happen. And if you go into communities and you do that, you're going to have a lot of black eyes. So why not avoid it and let an intermediary do this engagement work to set people up for success instead of going in and telling them what to do?
And the final thing is we really have to celebrate the heck out of every success. And so as an industry, all of us have to be out there telling all the good stories as much as possible so that people know what's possible. Anyone else?
I think we're out of time.
Okay. Thank you all so much for coming.